Hello and welcome back to the final part of my Let's Build series. Now that we've completed the archives, mains, mews, mess and hollows, we're moving on to the final major building that's going to be on the main campus, which is the Medica, where all of these students are going to be learning about the medical profession in the world of the Near of the Wind, and also where students go when they've been injured. Now, I didn't want the Medica to be like any of the buildings, and I always imagined that it had a kind of curve to it, almost as though it was a crescent shape. So I decided to create two wings that had rounded off fronts on the front of the building, and then rather than simply having a square backing, I created a little bit of a curve that did cause a few measurement issues when I started, so I ended up having to jump backwards and forwards trying to get it correct. I outlined the entire building using cobblestone, though I will be replacing it with a different material. It was just so I could get a clear understanding of how it was going to be set out from the beginning. And it's a good thing I did, as you can see I've done a corner incorrectly and I need to correct that. Now I thought about what material I was going to use and thought that as a hospital is going to be quite clean, quite clinical, it should really have a white floor, and so the only real block that could achieve this effect was the quartz block. Now, I was quite conscious about using this block as I just used it to create mews, but I thought that after a little bit of experimentation it was the correct block to use. I ended up trying out various different materials, moving from quartz, cobblestone, white stained clay and also sandstone at one point, but I could never quite get a combination that moved away from mews enough for me to be happy, but still looked good enough for the Medica. So I ended up settling for quartz and using that for the walls, and using the sculpted blocks as per usual for the bottom of the building and for each floor, and used quartz pillars for all of the corners. Now, when I was building Medica, I wanted to think about how I was going to make it look completely different to mews, so that it would have its own unique character. And when I saw the wings that I had on the front of the building, I thought about how I might use them in a different way, and thought about what a hospital might have, or rather what a hospital might have that I would like to see, that could be useful for certain patients. And I thought, other than the surgery room, maybe a garden separated from the lower ground was better. So I created a sloped roof, which I put a glass dome over, put in a floor so that I could then build up a dirt floor and add some fences to the ridge of the building, and thought that I'd create a small sitting area with maybe some trees, some flowers, a few tables and chairs, just for patients to sit down in whilst they're recovering, if they're allowed to. Around to the top, I created a very basic staircase, and then set about using quartz blocks to set out the outline of the different rooms that were going to be on the top floor. The bottom floor was going to be mainly a reception area, also a staff area to the right hand side, maybe a few guest rooms to the left hand side, as well as a cafeteria, but on the top it was mainly going to be different resting rooms with quartz slab beds for the medical tables for surgeries and for emergency operations, and woolen beds for patients who were staying for observation. I filled out each of the rooms with crafting benches where I imagined the doctors would put their tool, and also added a cauldron and filled it with water, so it would be a little basin for doctors to wash their hands and also to rinse off their tools. I created one room larger than the others, which I thought was going to be a surgery type of area for the really big kinds of operations. Then, once I was happy with the design of the floor, I created a ceiling of birch wood planks, which would then be topped off with a roof. But first of all, I wanted to get the glass domes correctly. Now, unfortunately, because of the way that the glass panes work in Minecraft, it's very hard to make a 3D structure out of them because of the way they transform, as it forms a crosswork of glass rather than a solid surface. So I ended up having to use glass squares, which I thought looked a bit too blocky, but in the end it was the best compromise that I could create. I used bone meal to grow a tree very quickly and also to add some flowers to the small garden that I'd got planned. Added a few chairs and some benches. And then I came around to the roof and decided to use green stained clay, as it was a colour I hadn't yet used, to start building up a low roof. I didn't want it to be too high, as it needed to be very different from the other building, and I thought that a lower roof would fit a bit better. I then came around Medica and started adding in different windows, which were very, very vital to all the different rooms. Using just torches inside of each of the rooms would make operating quite complex, especially with medieval lighting. I added in windows for each of the different rooms and filled them with white stained glass to continue making the building look as bright as possible. So there's Medica. I'm quite surprised by how little time it actually took me to build it. It was far less complicated than I thought it was going to be. But in the end, I was also very happy with how it turned out because of the gardens on the front, if nothing else. And now, with the Medica finish, there was only one last thing to really finish, which is the courtyard of the campus, in which Cloth is whipped after he gets caught with a candle inside of the archives. So I set up the stone pillar as the centre point of the courtyard and started building up stalls with fence posts, and then building up very small buildings which I thought could act as little shops for when students can't be bothered to cross the Omethi River to the south and go into town. I thought about the different shops there'd be, maybe an apothecaries, maybe a clothes shop and a smithy for different tools. Then I built them up in different styles as I had the rest of the campus. Now, unfortunately, I was running really low on time at this point, so I couldn't go too overboard and build an absolute load of buildings in the centre of the university. I might come back at a later date, even after the project's finished, just to add a few more buildings into it, just to flesh out the university a bit more. These buildings might include things such as hotels, inns, and general meeting spots, maybe a few gardens, that are dedicated gardens anyway, as I'm mainly planning on filling out the area with trees, almost as though the university is in a younger stage before Courtyard actually reaches the university, and it's still growing, it's still being built upon. At the top of the courtyard, which is currently on the right, you can see me working away at a smithy. I built the entire structure out of stone and added a dedicated chimney, and I also put some cobwebs in the chimney to sort of simulate smoke. I added a small downstairs area that was open to the weather, where the smith can work away on his anvil, and also gave him a small trough of water for tempering. I used different wool for the different stalls. I'm not entirely sure what they'd be selling yet, maybe foodstuffs, small snacks and items. Came around and started working on the apothecary. Now, one of the roofs that I had really wanted to use was a nether brick roof, as it looked very much like bricks which had been stained with chemicals almost. I decided to create a roof that had almost a channel running through it, as the building next to it would collect water if it rained, which would be a massive problem. So I thought the apothecary would be a building that was slightly better thought out and have some way for the water to get off of it. With these few shops, I'd say that's the courtyard, very basic courtyard, very much complete. And that's pretty much it. I've completed all of the main buildings from the book that I'm fitting onto the main campus. The crockery isn't on this, as unfortunately it's too far north to be loaded on the Minecraft map. And unfortunately I couldn't build the fishery, as I felt that needed to be much further southwest of the university, and I ran out of time. But I filled out the area with trees, and I'm very happy with everything that I've built thus far. It feels like a massive and sprawling campus. All of the buildings are fully furnished and fleshed out, and I feel that this is a place that you could really come and study at. It's certainly about as large as the campus at my university, and I certainly would love to have accommodation in use and pop over to mains every now and again. Even I got lost on the odd occasion whilst building, trying to figure out how I was going to get from building to building. It's been quite an adventure building all of this. When I first started, I didn't think that I was going to build quite so much, and even now that I've finished building everything I have and taking stock, I don't even feel like I've built enough just yet. I feel that there's still more in me that could be built. But unfortunately, because of time constraints, this is all I have time for. As I say, at a future point I might come back and add to the university for my own personal enjoyment, and if I do so, I will keep recording. But for the moment, I think that the university is pretty much complete. Feel that the Conquest texture pack has benefited this build greatly. As you can see from the archives, it's much more formidable looking. When I originally changed it from the Wolian HD resource pack to the Conquest, the material, which I'd used with bedrock, actually turned to green, so I ended up changing it to obsidian, which I thought was much darker and fit a lot better. Now, as we pan out over the university and I see everything that I've built, I'm really quite proud of how much I've done. And it isn't quite how I imagined the university would look originally when I started building, but I'm very happy with all it's turned out. A I'd like to thank you very much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed all the videos, and I apologise for my amateur camera work and also my audio commentary, as this is my first Let's Build series. I haven't got much experience, but I feel like I've built up quite a bit of confidence doing this, and you may see more content from me in the future. I'd like to say thank you very much for watching again, and I hope you have a very pleasant day.